when I came from the Maryland Institute to Penn, uh, I told you I had this kind of little thing with the college in Maryland that they didn't want me to graduate, and the president of the Maryland Institute at the time was a guy by the name of Eugene Leake, or Bud Leake as he was known. Now, Bud Leake was one of 150 artists that was in the show at MoMA called Recent Figure Painting in the USA in 1962. So he was that good that he was that in that show. And he reviewed all of my work and he told me, if you don't continue in art school and finish the regular course, you're never going to be an artist. You're short-circuiting the process. And I refused to listen and I was going to go. So the first day at Penn, they had a meeting, and if you remember, there was a room in the drawing wing, what they used to call the drawing room, where the drawing classes would meet and they'd have critiques, etc. So all the graduate students were in that room, and Welliver was addressing everybody. I had never met Welliver. I didn't know anything about anybody. So after the meeting, at the end, he looked at me and he points his finger and he says, "You're from Baltimore, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Don't leave. I want to talk to you." So everybody leaves the room and he walks up to me, and you remember him. He had a very big personality, very little guy, but a huge personality. He looks me in the eye and he says, "I hear you're a real hot dog." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I hear you're a hot dog." I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He says, "Well," he said, what are you doing here?" I said, "I came here to learn to paint." He said, "Well, if you come here to paint, you'll do fine. But if you aren't painting, if you're screwing around with me, I'm going to throw you right the fuck out that window." And he pointed to a little window, right? So I said, "I don't have any problem with that." So I walked away from him. I walked into my studio space. 20 minutes later, Alex Katz walks in the room and looks at my work and just trashes everything I had, completely crushed. I had nothing positive to say. And finally, he says to me, "Do you have any drawings?" He said, "This is such a mess." So I had a folio of drawings and I opened it and he's turning the pages and he's looking at the drawings. He stops and he said, "There's hope." He said, "It looks like you can draw," but he said, "These paintings are terrible." And he had a list of what was wrong with them, And I said, "Fine." And so uh, that was how I started at Penn. At, I threw myself into my work in such intensity. The next time I saw Alex Katz, I had 14 paintings for him to look at. And he walks into the room and he was startled. And he looks at the paintings and he turns to me. He says, "All right, we know two things. You work hard and you listen." He said, "There's still lots of problems here, but we have something we can work with." So anyway, I did 214 paintings in my first year at the University of Pennsylvania. Welliver said to me, he said, "You have made more progress than any student I've ever seen in my life. You've covered more ground than I thought is possible to cover." And he said, "So my goal of sending you to Skowhegan is I want you to chill out. I want you to uh, learn to just chill out a bit." So I get to Skowhegan and uh, I went to Skowhegan thinking I am a figure painter. That's what I am. I am this. And at Skowhegan, I encountered these students who, Skowhegan was the place where I'd never seen so many really talented people and so smart and so well informed. And I was clearly an inferior in so many ways, but you were challenged to have a personality, to assign yourself something. And I, I was into it. I started painting right away, and then I went into the figure painting studio, and I couldn't stand it in there. People were so compulsive and anal, and they were so tight. And if you rattled your brush in a tin can of a turpentine, they all turned and looked at you like you had just, shot a gun off or something. And I said, I don't know if I can do this. And so I looked outside and there's 300 acres of fields and woods. And I said, I think maybe I'm going to try to learn to paint landscapes, which I had never done. And we had this speaker who had been one of the founders with Sidney Simon, and his name was Bill Cummings. And he talked about when he got after World War II, he came to New York and he wanted to be an artist, so he got together with a bunch of other artists and they formed something called Portraits Incorporated in New York. So I took that idea and I had this friend that I had made from New Jersey from who was a Tyler student. And I said, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint landscapes, and I'm going to call it Sunsets Incorporated." And so we sort of had this thing that was kind of funny because nobody really was doing it, and we were going out and we were just making these little paintings. And slowly, I started to get an understanding of the landscape, and slowly, I began to build an idea about what landscape was. And then I found myself drawn to this pond where I was making these. At that time, painting was really very minimal. If it was figurative, it was very dry. And, but all the people who before us had been abstract expressionists. So the painting was very rich and fluid, etc. So I found this little pond where I was studying these water lilies on this pond and trying to make paintings of the surface of the pond, the reflection and all that. And I was told that Ellsworth Kelly had spent a lot of time at that very pond making drawings from the plant forms there. So anyway, I'm standing there and I'm painting. And I see the director of the school walking with a woman and a man. And they come up to me and they're standing behind me for a while watching me paint. And so the director comes over and he says, "I want to introduce you to two people." He says, "This is Miss Kitty Carlisle and Wilford Hyde White, who I knew him as an actor because I had seen him in Princeton in a play called Harvey, and he had played the role. And her I knew because she is a television personality from What's My Line or one of those stories. So anyway, then he says, Miss Carlisle would like to know if your painting is for sale. And I said, yeah, sure. Everything, everything is. And so she would like to know how much you want for it, he says. And I said, I don't know. How much do I want for it? He says, how about $80? I said, sounds good. So she says to Wilford Hyde White, give him $80. So he reaches in his pocket and gives me four 20s. And then they took the painting and walked away from me and went off on their own, right? And that was the kind of experience that Skowhegan was. It was filled with interesting and challenging people. And I got this idea that landscape mattered and that there was something that I couldn't ignore in that place. And I was fascinated by the people, the students. I really was fascinated by, we had Klaus Oldenburg for the weekend, and he was drawn to my paintings, and he said, yeah, Fairfield Porter is your teacher. I said, no, he's certainly one of my mentors, though. And he says, well, it shows. He said, you're a little sharper focus, but and I went through this, bevy of really, and I became really close with Paul Resica, who I just found him to be a fountain of curious wisdom. He didn't give you straight answers. He gave you philosophical thoughts, which enabled you to come with your own answer. But you couldn't get a yes or no. You only got a story that you had to fit yourself into or against. And so Skowhegan was a powerful force. And when I came back from Skowhegan, I really felt that I had taken a pilgrimage to a magical land, and I was armed with something new. So the figure, then I've spent the rest of my life trying to marry the landscape and the figure together, and put them in some kind of a form that expresses how I see the world and how I think. So I would say Skowhegan was so instrumental in helping me shape myself. It was really a powerful place.